Welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. Here's your host, Tom Bourne.
Hi, and welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. I'm your host, Tom Bourne, and with me today, all the way from the United States, is the wonderful Brad Green. Brad, how are you?
I am doing fantastic. How are you doing today?
Excellent, Brad. How was your day?
Well, I'm winding up. So far it's been good.
Oh,
I do apologize if my voice is a little raspy. I have been traveling a lot, going around to the various sites, spending a lot of time with those people at the sharp end of the organization who I represent day in and day out. And unfortunately, though, uh, the flights and the weather has gotten to me, so my voice is. I lost my voice over the weekend, and then I had to coach softball all weekend, and that didn't help. And now I'm a little raspy. But other than that, I'm doing fantastic.
how'd you go in softball?
We did better, better than we normally do. We are getting better. It's a transformation. I coach 6U right now. I've coached softball for the last 20 years, and I've spent a lot of time, coaching young girls transition, find their way in life. I would say, find their way of working with one another, figuring out what their strengths are, motivations are. A lot like I do in health and safety, but really be able to not really focus on the negatives, but also focus a lot on the positive aspects that they bring to the team.
Excellent. All right. Brad, I brought you on because you came to my attention from lovely LinkedIn. And on lovely LinkedIn, you're fairly straightforward. You say what you think, and it seems you say what you think and what you believe without fear or favor of the consequences. You have thoughtful posts which you're able to back up with back up with science, shall we say. Um, how long have you been in safety, and what got you into safety to start with?
Good question. I have been in HSC for 17 years. I've worked in various industries. And I would say I got into safety for a few reasons, but I often call it divine intervention. Back in 2002, I was involved in a very horrific car incident. And while I survived, of course, my injuries were very extensive. My left femur was severely fractured, approximately 4 inches below the hip, and my left shoulder was dislocated. While in college, I was playing football, so I eat and breathe football, working out, weightlifting, etc. And that night, I had to go to the emergency room and have emergency surgery, and had to stay in the hospital for about 18 days. Spent about 9 months in a wheelchair. Went through many months of physical therapy. I lost approximately 55 pounds and was told basically I could never play football or sports again. And of course, as you can imagine, I was pretty devastated. Uh, to this day, though, one thing that even though it was more than 20 years ago, I remember the moment that my mother and father walked into the room right after they brought me to the emergency room. And as soon as my mother seen me, she collapsed, and out of fear. And I seen my dad look at me, and I could not tell. I could see the fear in his eyes. The unknown was there. And at that moment, and I can still feel that today. And matter of fact, he and I just talked about this 3 or 4 days ago, and he said he can still remember it just like it was yesterday as well. And the reason I got into safety after I recovered is because I wanted to do whatever I could do to ensure that other fathers and mothers, brothers, sisters sons and daughters did not have to go through that tragic tragedy that my parents had to go through. I had to quit college and had to basically, they had to take care of me day in and day out for multiple days. They had their lives stopped. And one of the reasons why my injuries were so significant was because I was not wearing my seatbelt. And I realized at that time that I had a story, and that I went back to college and I majored in safety and health. As a matter of fact, while I was recovering, I called the dean of the college and said, "This is what I want to do. I want to use this as my path to help others." And so I wanted to make sure that I could do whatever I could do to prevent or at least reduce the probability of those types of injuries from a work-related perspective. With that being said, I am I'm very outspoken, and I'm always the ones that's going to speak up for those that are either scared to speak up, or those that are a little afraid to maybe push the status quo, if you will. To me, there's no learning if an individual does not push their boundaries. And I look at this both from when I coach and when I am practicing health and safety.
Yeah, good. I've never said it on air before, but hey, you've been honest enough. One of the things that shaped me, I don't know if it had a direct impact, but I still remember the day that two police officers knocked on our door when I was 5 years old and said my dad wasn't coming home. And it still impacts me, if I still think of it, and that's an awful long time ago, because let's be honest, I'm old. I still get emotional about that. And I think safety from those who've experienced real life events, it's a lot more genuine. It's a lot more believable when you've actually lived through the events. I've got to ask you, and I don't know if I should, but I'm going to ask you anyhow. And this is just for anyone else who perhaps trivializes accidents, incidents, injuries that happen. How humbling was it for a full-grown man, a big football player, to have your mum and dad take care of you on a day-to-day basis while you're recovering?
Quite humbling. You realize how brittle life really is, and how no matter how big and strong you are, life can be extinct in moments notice. And that's what really drives me, is to get people to understand that decisions that we make right now can impact us forever. And of course, many people know that's speaking, or that's listening to us right now, have had relatives and family members that have been involved in serious injuries and fatalities. And it's very humbling when they have to build a ramp onto their house just so they can wheel me up into their house, right? And so it's very devastating, but it also taught me that I'm not invincible. And so I realized at that time that life is just so brittle, and we cannot take things for granted. And I would say that my father and I, one of the stories is my dad worked me into college and scared me into safety, because I grew up on a farm, working day in and day out, heavy construction, doing whatever. But really, my father taught me the value of hard work and the value of a dollar. My mother, though, taught me the care factor. how it was to make sure you appreciate one another, and to make sure that no matter what, that that as long as you try your hardest, you give it all your all, then you've done a good job. And so to your point, and to everyone out there, don't be ashamed of it though, if that comes to a point, whether an injury or a psychological event. It's while it's humbling, it is also not a weakness as well.
Yeah, good.
It's an opportunity.
I can tell you now. Almost every week, I have dealings with people from what we have in Australia called Paraplegic Benefit Fund, and these are people who've suffered spinal cord injuries, and we get they come out and they talk to our students about how life can change in literally an instant, and some of the things they talk about when you get injured, and it's a lot of things that people don't think about. No one thinks they're going to get injured at work. No one thinks about the consequences. And even when someone does get injured, they just go basically, oh, they're injured, but they're alive. Everything's great. Some of the things they talk about is the challenges, things like showering, going to the toilet. One of the gentlemen I speak to quite regularly, a gentleman named Greg. He tells me that the day he picked up the spinal cord injury and he became a paraplegic, it was almost like a rebirth for him. The old Greg died and the new Greg came out of it. And it's not necessarily, he likes the new version of himself, but that's what he's got. That's what it is. Yep. And I don't think we actually, when we go to work and we make these decisions, I don't think, or we expose ourselves occasionally to things that perhaps we shouldn't. We can think of what the consequences actually are, because they may be life changing and they might be lifelong events.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And while you can't tell from the outside, I wake up every morning and every day in somewhat pain. But I can tell you a story about this weekend that happened to my daughter, and luckily, she was wearing her mask, which in the U.S. softball players wear a mask, and she is a shortstop, and she hit a hard ground ball was hit to her, and at a moment's notice, the ball come up and hit her right in the nose. And luckily, she had a mask on. But if she had not, I can't imagine what had happened, because it actually bloodied her nose. And so if that was not on there, so there was just no reaction time whatsoever.
Yeah.
And in a moment's notice, her life could have been changed as well, for the worse. But luckily, that is something that we require in our league, at least, is those safety devices to at least reduce the probability or the severity of these type of events.
Yeah.
But you can imagine I was running out there as soon as it hit her, because I heard it plump, and I knew what she was going to feel like, because even though you have those masks on, it still hurts.
That's right. That's right. Ah, dear. Now you talked about people spending time with the people on the sharp edge, the actual people at the coal face, so to speak. How important is it for safety practitioners to spend a considerable amount of their time with their people at the front line, as opposed to doing paperwork in the office?
Oh, the paperwork story. Well, I can tell you that we spend a lot of time doing a lot of work and a lot of activities that don't really contribute to the safety and health of our workplace. And it's probably one of the reasons why I probably left my previous employer, because I realized that I was mostly doing paper stuff, safety stuff, and not really contributing to the safety of work. And for me, I've spent the last 2 weeks out on the shop floor with our employees, just talking about personal things, whether it be personal trips, personal activities that we're doing, that they're doing, trips, vacations. Of course, we also naturally, because of my role, we do talk about safety, and we talk about hazards and things that we can help them do in a better fashion. But I think it's extremely important. It's out there being, understanding how work is actually being done. I was recently with an employee, and he had mentioned that he said, "Yeah, I had a spill the other day," and I said, "You know, thank you for acknowledging that you had a spill, but I would like to change this verbiage around a little bit and say it's we had a spill.
Mm.
We did not have the proper systems in place to ensure that that spill was that spill could the probability of that event from happening. We did not have the relevant safeguards in place, the proportional safeguards in place. So while I acknowledge your acknowledgement, I would say that it is not your responsibility 100%. It's our responsibility, and we've got to work together as a team to ensure that we have proportional safeguards in place for the risk that we're dealing with."
How did he react to that?
He said, "I never thought of it that way." And I thought, of course you haven't, because you probably never heard of someone say that. But I think that just tells me the importance of going out and reframing things and realizing that safety is not about one person. It's about an organization. It's about a mutual responsibility. And while they know how to get their jobs done, we need to leverage that expertise and not tell those people how to actually do their job. And oftentimes, what we see within organizations is people that are not actually doing the work or prescribing the work and expecting people to do that task perfectly every time, which is to me a little backwards. And
Yeah.
so I wrote a guide not very long ago on how to change out some cylinders, and it was a guide. I don't write standards. I usually write guides for sites that I represent, and then I request that our site HSSE managers work with their site personnel to see how it best fits their needs. And when I was talking to the operator, he made me aware that, well, if we take this step here, then it's going to create an additional hazard if we don't just if we could just simply flip flop the steps around. And without that communication, I could have potentially put something in place that would have actually made the job harder for them and set them up for failure rather than success. So again, just it's important to go out there and talk to people about not only safety, but about how we actually get work done.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the way you simply reframe the whole thing by changing a few simple words around and took some ownership, or at least joint ownership of an issue, rather than assigning the old us and them. Yeah. I also like the way you talked about, I don't know, talking to people before talking to them about safety. I think that's build a bit of relationship and rapport building. How important do you reckon that is when you actually are trying to establish trust in the workplace?
Well, I think my mantra is learning and improving through the lens of curiosity. And I'm extremely curious about how work is actually done. I come up through working with my hands, and
Mhm.
unfortunately nowadays I work behind a desk most of the time. but I really like to get my hands dirty. Uh, I'm an avid hunter. I like to work on my own vehicles and build things at my place, at my house. And so I actually love work. And sometimes I catch myself wanting to actually go out there and actually do the work, but I know that's not my role. And so I'm very curious about how things actually are, how things are getting done. But I often talk about personal stories about what they like to do off the job, not so much on the job. I like to really get to understand what motivates them, what drives them. Um, as you probably have seen and heard, we have an aging workforce, um, just like a lot of other organizations. And I like to hear what the future lies within them. How do they see them spending the next 20 years or so after retirement, hopefully? And what do they really enjoy doing? And once you get a mutual respect from one another, then it just becomes a natural ebb and flow, if you will. It's just, having a conversation, and then we get to talk about, safety uh, more organically than it is forced, feeling like you have to actually force it onto
Yeah.
someone.
Yeah. And no one likes it when the only time the safety person comes up to them is to give them a lecture about safety, do they?
No, I think for me, it's one of the most rewarding aspects of my job, I would say, in my career is when an employee comes to me and tells me that they decided to do something differently at home because of a conversation we had had recently at work. And they eagerly explain the task, and they inform me of how they did the job and how they executed it differently with so much enthusiasm. And then they go on to tell me what they changed to make the task safer. And many times they explain to their kids and their husbands or wives why they decided to change their approach. And to me, there's nothing more rewarding than that. And without trust, I don't believe, and without mutual respect, I don't believe that you can have that kind of impact on someone without trust and respect.
Yeah, 100% agree. All right. For people who are fairly new to the safety industry, I hate calling it an industry, but anyhow, the safety field, we'll call it that. How would you go about if you were to talk to someone who's just starting out in safety? How would you go about saying to them or suggesting that they go up and actually have that conversation with a frontline person working in the front line, working the machinery, working the plant and equipment about, hey, how do you do your job? Why do you do it in this particular way, etc.?
Well, we must react with curiosity. Begin with curiosity. Understand that you don't know uh, how anything works within your new industry, and get to understand the ins and outs of their operations, whether it be operations, maintenance. One of my biggest passions is contractor safety. One of the reasons why is I see people treat contractors very poorly,
Hmm.
and I see them as being one of my greatest assets. And so I spend a lot of time out there speaking to our contractors and really trying to treat them as if they're our own employees. As a matter of fact, at my sites, whether it be celebrations or uh, town halls that we have, my contractors are always invited to those events. We often have, we just have them, we call them breaks. We don't call them anything, but we have conversations, luncheons, and we invite them in to be part of the team. And naturally, they become some of your best employees, and they're often always willing to speak up when they get your trust and when they realize that you're not out there to just push them around and tell them what to do. And to me, again, just react with curiosity, just like with anything new. Uh, just like we were born with curiosity. As a little kid, we don't know what we don't know, and and don't be judgmental, right?
Mm.
One of the things that we're good at during when we go to school is we get to learn the rules and the regulations. But of course, when I look at those things, I don't see numbers, I don't see letters, I see people. Rules and regulations were put into those papers, those books that we read because someone was significantly injured or hurt or killed because of those requirements. And I tell people that we've got to humanize the safety and health world. Got to treat people like people, humans like humans. They're not numbers, they're not machines, they're not objects to be controlled. They're people. And can you imagine what it would feel like if I was going to tell you day in and day out how to do your job
Mm.
and just only look at you as a number on a piece of paper
Yeah, or a commodity. I like
or a
what you say.
commodity?
Yeah, I like what you say about contractors. Some of the workplaces I've seen over here, still contractors are treated as like second class citizens, and basically every derogatory term comes in, and we're told that it doesn't really matter. They're only a contractor. They're people. They're people who have people who depend on them and care about them, just like I don't know everyone else. From speaking to you so far, I'd say you are a fairly firm believer in just culture. Would that be correct?
I am. I would say that we've got to react restoratively whenever there is an unintended deviation from an expected outcome. We've got to react with curiosity, uh, rather be it whenever we do have an outcome that we don't like, right? And when we say just culture, when I talk about just culture, it's more around the fact that we got to react. And one of the reasons why I adopted the mantra of learning and improving through curiosity is once you start reacting retributively, start blaming, learning stops,
Mm.
improvement stops. It's stifled, as soon as that begins. And so we got to treat people uh, respectfully and not be so quick to judge.
Yeah, I'd say retributive justice also basically stops any trust, and stops reporting. Let's be honest about it.
Of course, it does. It does create an illusion of safety and risk, that safety and risk is being controlled or managed, but it really doesn't benefit the coal face, right? It only benefits the upper echelons of the organization.
Yeah,
But
our,
but to
our,
me, yeah,
our good friend Clive Lloyd has a nice little theory about the trust and the fear cycles, and very well illustrated about how if we are seeking to punish, if we're seeking to name, blame, and shame people over incidents, how there is no trust. And then, yeah, you do get that wonderful kickback from, as you said, the numbers game. Everything looks good because there's no incidents until someone
yeah,
dies.
until someone dies, of course. And well, I would say there's no incidents that we know about, but
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you that there is.
Yeah.
And and it's not really zero harm because you can't really measure all harm. We call that, I call that selective harm. We only measure those things that we can see, but there are a lot of things that we cannot see or we will never see. And so yes, I follow Clive Lloyd quite closely, and I would say he's probably one of my mentors, if you will. He probably doesn't know it, but he and I spend talk a lot, and his book is one of the books that got me to really changing my way of not really. I've always believed that the traditional approach to HSC was not the right approach, that we should be react more restoratively. I knew there was not a lot of um, the benefit of looking at numbers and looking at incident rates did not feel right to me. And whenever there was an unintended deviation from an expected outcome, we started blaming people. And I often learned that we just it stifled improvement.
Mm.
And there had to have been a better way. And of course, a few years ago, through I guess 2.5 years ago or so, I stumbled across, the safety differently, the HOP, uh, and then Clive Lloyd's book, which really just tied everything together for me, which was, as we discussed earlier, the importance of going out there and building trust first. Then we can start talking about how we manage safety, how we do safety um, within an organization.
Yeah. One of the things we seem to have over in Australia, I wonder if it's an Australia specific thing. So I'm just kind of picking your brain a bit about it. We seem to have an awful lot of short-term contracts over here for safety professionals, 3 months, 6 months, sometimes it's a 1 month contract. How do you go about building trust and influencing change if you're only on site for 3 months?
It's quite complicated, and I think that's the complexity of when you do construction. That's one of the most complicated things. But if you're in a mature organization, they realize the side effect or the byproduct of that type of behavior, of that type of approach.
Mm.
And normally when you hire someone from that short period of time, you're only hiring them to do one thing, to verify everybody's in compliance with some requirement that the organization demands as perfect and has to be followed. They're not there to actually mature the organization. They're there to verify people are acting the way that people think that they should act, right? So for me, when you have a good rapport with your contractors and you have a good understanding and mutual respect with one another, they tend to follow you. And so you have more time. And unfortunately, it's not just in Australia. I see it here in the United States as well. But I would say that their role is not intended to be, unfortunately, that those change agents. They're there to simply do safety stuff,
Yeah.
right? To create an illusion. There are very many good safety professionals that do this day in and day out, and that's what they do. That's more traditional safety,
Mhm.
right? Making sure people follow the rules, doing audits, maybe investigations, JSAs, work permits, etc. But that's just a lot of stuff that we've built upon ourselves to create an illusion that safety and risk is being managed many times, but doesn't really address the underlying issues.
Yeah, yeah. All right. For you, how do you measure success in safety?
I think I talked about it a little bit. I don't really measure it numerically per se, but a while ago I'd mentioned, when people bring it home
Yeah.
with them, when people share their stories with me, that how they changed their behaviors or changed their way of doing something at the house and then shared that message with their family. To me, that's how I measure success. When people call me or when people call my organization saying, we have a problem, uh, we want you to come in and try to figure out, we want to run this by you to see if this makes sense. This could be people either in operations, maintenance, but for me, success is based on when they call you, is it because they want something, or is it because they actually want help? And when people want help and want to find a way of doing things better, then to me, that is success in my book.
Yeah. Do you find that approach, and I applaud that approach, by the way, do you find that approach brings you into conflict with those who expect quantitative data rather than qualitative data?
More than likely, yes. Unfortunately, I have to manage up and down. And so, as safety professionals, we do got to measure things quantitatively and qualitatively as well. And I think throughout my whole career, I've often had conflicts of that around that, because I think I often, when I first started my job, I thought to myself, if we stay at zero so long, at what point will this organization say that I'm no longer needed because we're so safe, right? And so to me, that it just didn't make sense to me. And as traditional safety, is usually defined as the absence of unwanted outcomes or harm, such as incidents, accidents, or injuries. And with many organizations believing that all injuries are preventable, and many organizations pursue zero, with their primary focus in reducing incidents and all sorts of frequency rates to zero. You even see organizations reward people for achieving, dubious milestones. For me, that's not safety. That's just measuring stuff, in my opinion. That's not really measuring what safety actually is, which is the presence of not only capacity but able to manage risk to acceptable levels within the given organization.
And to have some measure of resilience for when stuff does happen.
Of course. And I think, just as I had mentioned earlier with my daughter, when she got hit with the softball while she had a mask on, that's, even though she had a bloody nose, I would call that a success.
Yeah.
Right. And how can we use that to share amongst others to show how important it is to make sure that how quick things can actually evolve without us even knowing.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I teach students literally every week, and it's a very hard sell to try and shift the mindset to say to them, hey, listen, incidents will happen, human error will occur, but the emphasis should be on providing systems that are robust enough that no one dies or no one gets seriously injured, as opposed to, we think that no incident will happen, but when it actually does, it's a catastrophic event. And you can see it, that literally everything they've been taught in their life about safety, it's a bit of a I don't know, come to the mountain Moses moment for them. It's hard work to try and change that mindset in people.
Yes, so I think that's some of the challenges, is getting organizations to understand a couple of things: that their injury rates likely do not indicate anything, defining what safety is and the role of the safety professional. And I believe that safety practice requires embracing the concept of acceptable risk as a goal. And the role of the safety professional is not to eliminate risks, but manage risk to an acceptable level within the business context. This becomes difficult when we pile a lot of activities on them, though, that do not contribute to the safety of work. We talked about, a lot of these activities create an illusion that safety and risk are being adequately managed. However, many of those activities do not contribute to a safe workplace. And so for me, I often speak around zero and risk are contradictory. where there's hazards, there's risk. And while we want to reduce those risks to as low as reasonably practicable, they're still there. And so how can we ensure that we put proportional safeguards in place to ensure that to reduce the likelihood that adverse outcomes will result from those events?
Yeah. All right. Not long ago, I sent you a book because I thought it was such good value, and you said you hadn't read it. A book by Greg Smith called Paper Safe. How'd you find that?
Brilliant read. I think he and I growing, I think one of the things right when I got into safety, I did everything I could to read the law, to understand what the actual law required us to actually do. And again, it was a brilliant read. One of the things I like most of it is his use of real world case studies, which really humanized his perspective. And one of the courses that I took, I had to actually do what he did in his book, was read these case studies in which people got fatally injured or suffered a fatal incident on the workforce, and how what was occurring, and study these actual activities. Several facets of this book resonates with me and how I view the health and safety profession. I often don't say it so eloquently as he. I often say the why behind the what. When does the process become more important than the purpose? Is he really focuses on the purpose rather than the process? I often refer to this as the why behind the what. The process may create an illusion that risks are being managed, but illusions are not reality. and one of the best parts of this particular book is that the most basic, the illusion of safety, refer to an unfounded belief that policies, procedures, and processes and other documented coupled with lots of activity in the name of safety mean that safety risks are being managed, whether history would rather tell us otherwise. So when safety processes are often imposed on to those at the sharp end with little to no understanding of why they are necessary, it creates an illusion, but it creates an environment where people are set up for failure, not success. And as safety professionals, we spend an enormous amount of energy developing materials that do not contribute to the safety of work. And I think he just solidified my stance on the importance of going out there and figuring out how work is actually being done, and not requiring and not expecting things to be perfect all the time just simply because it's written on a piece of paper. And I've often said this multiple times before reading the book, is our processes and our procedures are one of our biggest liabilities, in my opinion, because if it's written down, we better do it.
Yeah. He makes the point quite clearly that all of those policies and procedures you have can actually be used against you in court, instead of just being, the worker didn't follow it, but we've got maybe 5 years of evidence that no one was ensuring that your own company's policies and procedures, your methodologies of reducing risk, were actually followed or monitored, which is, I don't know. To me, it's a great wake-up call for managers as well as safety professionals, because the whole idea of, I don't know, we've got to do things, so I don't know, we'll just cover it by writing a new policy or procedure. Will be covered legally, if nothing else. He sort of blows that out of the water.
I actually had that conversation today with my staff.
Yep.
Around, we wanted to implement some small changes around hazard recognition, but with the caveat that we removed the same amount of things from our organization that we were going to implement. So I think the conversation is being had and being heard. And I talk a lot within my organization about safety clutter. And one of the things that I did when I went around to my sites was looking at a lot of the activities that people were doing that really did not contribute to the safety of work, but just but creating the mostly driven by compliance, right? And there's a lot of things that we have to do for the sake of compliance, and that's got to be we've got to understand the amount of work people actually are required to do in order to stay compliant, to make sure that we are staffed properly, because of course we've got to make sure that we're in compliance with whatever regulation that you have to be in, meaning that if you have to have a report into the state or to the government, it's got to be, in there at a certain time. But that takes up a lot of work, and it really does not contribute to the sharpen of the organization being more safe.
That's true. All right. Just a couple of questions before we go, because I'm running low on time. Big, broad question. Are you optimistic about the future of safety in the United States?
I am optimistic about the future in general. There are some excellent discussions going on, and I do see some shifts on how we view safety in general. However, I'm not overly optimistic that organizations will stop using incident rates as a primary measure of success or failure, or being used during performance evaluations, or using the decline in incident rates as proof of efficacy of safety initiatives or investments. So while I am optimistic on one hand, I'm not overly optimistic on the other. I still consider the traditional sense of safety being, in that essence, being used not as an advocate for forward.
Do you think one of the hardest things as safety professionals we may have to do is change the paradigm on how management view success in safety? That we have to move away from the purely, as I said, purely quantitative measurements?
Well, I think there's a lot more learning in success than there is failure. And in today's world, we don't actually have a lot of failure. And I often say, why do we have to wait for a failure to learn and improve, while there's successes every day? Now, that just because you're successful doesn't necessarily mean that you've done everything correctly or as safely as you wanted to. But why do we wait for a failure to actually realize we have an issue with our systems? As you know, our systems are under constant degradation. They're under constant motion. Humans are fallible. They make mistakes. And for me, it's we've got to understand that nothing's perfect. We do not live in a perfect world, nor should we strive to live in a perfect world.
Yeah, no, that's good, Brad. All right, Brad, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show today. I wish we had more time, but unfortunately we don't. Thanks very much for your time today, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
I do. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thanks for listening to Health and Safety Conversations with Tom Bourne. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week.